everyone. Welcome back to the Digital Adoption Show. I'm your host, Shreya Srivastav, Senior Customer Success Manager at WhatFix. And today we are diving deep into something that impacts every organization, learning and development. And we have just the right person to break it down. Joining me is Will Thalheimer, a consultant, speaker, researcher, and author who's been reshaping how we think about learning for over 2 decades. He's brain behind the learning transfer evaluation model, what we call as LTEM, and the performance focused learner survey, both of which have changed the way organizations measure learning impact. Plus, he just launched his new book, The CEO's Guide to Training, E-Learning, and Work. In today's episode, we are going to unpack evidence-based learning strategies, explore why traditional training evaluation often miss the mark, and get Will's insight on where L&D is headed in a fast-changing world. Phew, that's a lot, isn't it? This is going to be a fascinating conversation. So let's jump right in. Welcome to the show, Will. How do you feel?
Thank you. Thank you, Shreya. I feel great. That is a very generous introduction. Thank you very much. And thanks to the whole WhatFix team. Really appreciate being invited.
That sounds good. I hope you have bugged up yourself for a lot of things that I'm going to ask you today.
All right, I'm ready.
Okay, so here we go. But first things first, before we dive into our discussion on future of L&D and a lot of future L&D stuff, let's kick things off with a fun round of this and that to get a peek at your personality beyond the podium. So are you ready for it?
I guess so. It's a little dangerous.
It's going to be real quick. It's going to be real quick. Okay, the first thing, time travel or teleportation?
Oh, I've always wanted to time travel. It'd be like so much fun to go back in time. Maybe a little scary to go forward in time, but I'd love to do that.
Okay, that's interesting. Early bird or night owl?
Unfortunately, both. Don't get enough sleep.
Oh, okay. Mentoring or coaching?
Either's great. It's a real privilege to be asked to be a coach or a mentor.
That's fun. Networking events or online communities?
Networking, like in person or online communities. I think I'd go with, even though I'm an introvert, I think I'll go with networking in person.
Yeah, even I love networking. Office life or remote work? The best debatable topic at this point.
Oh, I've been remote work for 20 years before it was cool, before it was required. Yeah, definitely remote work.
Okay. Being able to read minds or being able to control time? That's interesting.
Yeah, no way I want to read anybody's mind. Can you imagine all their crazy thoughts and what they think of you? And terrible.
Yeah, that can be scary. You don't know what someone else is thinking.
Exactly.
Okay, I have one more question for you. Learning a new software system by reading a 500-page manual or being thrown into the deep end with no instruction?
Nobody wants to read a 500-page manual, so I'll dive into the deep end.
That was awesome. I'm glad you took that as an answer because I can't imagine myself reading that 500-page manual. Really, that's going to be crazy. Now that's some fun we had, let's dive into the heart of today's conversation. But before we move, we would like to know more about your journey in the L&D space, right? How did it all start? How did you evolve into the leader you are today?
Okay, those are two different questions. And I don't know. I'll just skip the leader part. That sounds too self-aggrandizing. But how did I start on this journey? I was actually in business school. I was getting a master's, an MBA, Master's in Business Administration. And I thought those courses were fine, but they didn't really energize me. So I looked around my university. This was Drexel University out of Philadelphia. And I found some courses on instructional design. And I started taking them and I loved it. And so I decided that's how I'm going into the field. And then it's been a long journey since then, but that's how I got started.
That's indeed insightful. And I'm sure everyone would like to have a journey like you had and learn a lot from you.
You know, let me tell you the story. Actually, it was interesting. So in my master's program, we had to do a senior project, and I was trying to build a simulation using a difficult programming language, Lisp, for those of your listeners. And so I was interested in simulations. And so I decided I'm going to combine my business background and my simulation interest. And so I was looking for a job in that area. And it was very new. This is back in the 1980s. And so this simulation, computer-based simulation idea was pretty new. So I was looking through Training Magazine. And there, one of the advertisements said the strategic management group world
Mhm.
leaders in business simulation. And I said, wow, that's perfect. I want to work for them. And
Mhm.
look through to find out where they were located. They were 4 blocks from my house.
Oh.
So I put on my one business suit that I owned and I went down there the next day and I said,
Mhm.
hey, I want to work for you guys. And they said, we're too busy today. Come back. But I eventually
Mhm.
started working. So that's how I really got started in the field.
That's interesting. Like we always say that great things happen just one fine day, surprisingly. And I think that's what happened for you. And okay, so now I'm all packed to ask you a lot of questions. And I'm sure our listeners would be keen to hear your experience. So again, Will, you have been at the forefront of merging learning science research with everyday L&D practice, like you just mentioned, right? So can you share a specific turning point or challenge that pushed you to bridge that gap? And how did your experience change your approach to solve L&D challenges today?
Uh, it wasn't one specific incident, but it was a series of
Mhm.
things.
Mhm.
I'd been in the field a while and I had gotten a PhD in human learning
Mhm.
and cognition. And I was out working in the field and I noticed a bunch of things that we were doing that just didn't make sense. They didn't align with what we knew about the research. For example, we would focus on concepts and principles. We wouldn't teach decision making. We didn't think about what works. We didn't think about all the supports that were needed. We didn't do some good learning evaluation. And so I thought what we need somebody to bridge the gap between the research side and the practice side. There's wisdom on both
Yeah.
sides,
Mhm.
but the practitioners, we L&D folks, we need to know more about the research, and the researchers would do well to do some research that we could use in a practical way. So I set out to do that. I started my own consulting practice that way. So that's really what got me started.
And looking back, what were some of the common misconceptions in L&D about learning science? And can you give some examples of how busting of one of those myths, especially back then, led to real improvement in learning outcomes?
Sure. So a whole bunch of misconceptions. So one is we focused on content. Content is king.
Sure.
But we teach too many concepts, right? It was all about lecture. Back then it
Yeah.
was in the classroom. There was no online learning per se.
True.
And so we just inundate people with information and they couldn't possibly pick it up. We weren't doing things to support remembering, like providing realistic practice, providing spaced repetitions and things like that. We also didn't measure effectively.
Mhm.
And there was some weird ideas floating around. I was involved in leadership training and we built simulations to help that. And so we'd have these group work. And some
Mhm.
folks say, this is great. There's so much energy in the room. Look at these
Mhm.
discussions. They're so energized. So what? They're energized, but are they saying the right things? Are they learning the right things? Are they learning misinformation? Or are they just talking about lunch? So we had some of these overly simplistic kind of things that we would focus on. Well,
Interesting.
yeah, that's not great.
Yeah, no, I'm glad we are able to get over the misconception. And that's where we have a whole lab space now, where what fixes. It's great to see people and organization really adapting to those L&D changes and learning and realizing the impact of it. Okay, so I have a next question as well for you. So traditional learner surveys often miss the mark on capturing meaningful outcomes at times. So which conventional evaluation method do you find most problematic? And what shortcomings inspired you to develop a performance-focused learner surveys?
Oh, yeah. If you've been around the field for a while and you look at our learner surveys, the traditional ones, sometimes we call them smiley sheets, smile sheets, happy
Yeah.
sheets. And that's a derogative term because we're skeptical. And so, number one, I started looking at them that way too. I'm not really getting good information to help me
Mhm.
make this course better, to keep what's good. But then I came across this research. It was a meta-analysis, so a scientific study of many other scientific studies, where they
Mhm.
found that our traditional smile sheets were
Mhm.
correlated with learning results at 0.09, virtually no correlation at all. 0.30 is considered a weak correlation, 0.30 and below, so 0.09, virtually no correlation. So you get high marks in your smile sheets. You could have a good course, but almost equally likely a bad course. You get low marks on your smile sheets. You could have a poorly designed course, but almost equally likely a well-designed course. So that really got me thinking is that this is clearly not good enough. My first instinct was maybe we should just throw them out. We should not use them. But then I realized, you know what? Been using these for years and years, decades. They're a tradition. And it's also respectful to ask our learners what they think. I thought, can we make them better? And that's what I set out to do. I wrote a book on this, first published in 2016,
Mm-hmm.
called Performance Focused Learner Surveys, and then a second edition published in 2022. They're very different. The traditional smile sheets use Likert-like scales. So that means we give people a statement and we tell them, do you strongly agree? Do you agree? Do you neither agree nor disagree, et cetera? And then they circle that and we put a number on that, or a fuzzy
Mm-hmm.
numeric scale, 1 to 5, 1 to 10. Those don't
Mm-hmm.
really give learners a clear choice. They struggle between
Yeah,
strong
true.
agree and agree. And the performance focused learner survey uses concrete answer choices, but also it focuses not only on learner satisfaction in general, but we
Yeah.
try to
Mm-hmm.
focus more on course effectiveness. For example, in the book, I talk about the 4 pillars of training effectiveness. That is, do the learners understand? Are they motivated to apply? Are they likely to remember what they've learned? And are there after training supports? And so we ask questions related to those 4 pillars, and that gives us more of an idea about the effectiveness of the learning intervention. Now, I'll be the first one to say we should not just be using learner surveys. We
Mm-hmm.
should do good ones, but we should do more than that as well. But that's the general idea. Would you like to, should I read off a question to give people a clearer idea of what one of these questions might look like?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. This is the book, Performance Focused Learner Surveys. Okay. So in the book, I have 50 candidate questions. This is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
How able are you to put what you've learned into practice in your work? Choose the one option that best describes your current readiness. My current role does not enable me to use what I learned. I am still unclear about what to do and or why to do it. I need more guidance before I know how to use what I learned. I need more experience to be good at using what I learned. I can be successful now in using what I learned, even without more guidance or experience, or I can perform now at an expert level in using what I learned. So obviously, this is about something important, on the job performance.
Yeah.
But the key thing about this is the
Mm-hmm.
answer choices are, they're distinctive.
Yep.
And so that has 3 advantages. One is the learners are more motivated to complete your learner surveys, right? Because they're
Yeah.
not just a bunch of smile sheet, Likert-like things. If you ever seen an old paper-based one, you'll see people would circle the
Mm-hmm.
same number all the way down. They're not really thinking. So these are more motivating because people can see that they have meaning. Secondly, we're giving people concrete answer choices, not struggling, does it strongly agree or agree? They're choosing ones that are more concrete so they can wrap their heads around and they can get a clearer idea about
Yeah.
what they're choosing. And number 3, the data we can get can be much more compelling. So
No. Mm-hmm.
when we find out that 40% say they can't use what they learned, that's not good. Or we find out that 90% can use what they learned, then that is
Mm-hmm.
good. That's more, the results are much more clear.
Indeed. I think it's very important to follow what you learn and bring that into your own workspace, right? You learn something every day from everyone. And it's very important if you're not able to incorporate that in your day to day basis. So that's a very good point that you brought up. And again, when you try to do something different, I'm sure there comes a lot of reactions to it, right? So in your scenario, what unexpected reaction have you encountered when you were introducing all these new methods and how your organization have adapted to it?
That's a great question. When people begin to use performance focused learner surveys, so one of the things I find is that we'll go, these are very different. I'm
Mhm.
not sure. I'm not sure our
Mhm.
learners will like them.
Yeah.
I heard that response from the very beginning after the first edition was published. And my thought was, I kept this to myself, but do you think your learners like your current versions? But then I developed a question. I did some research on this, went to 2 global organizations. We look at 20 different courses on
Mhm.
all different types of topics, et cetera. And we asked the learners what they thought about the new set of questions. And I think it was 80% of the learners liked the new questions better than the old questions, and 90% liked them better or equal. So learners much more like these. So that's one thing. There was that a little bit of resistance, but that using that question, at least the first few times you roll out your new questions,
Mm.
that question's in the book, by the way, just melt the resistance. So that's one thing. The other thing is what I've learned over the years, I learned the
Mhm.
hard way, is that what learning teams should do if they're going to use these new questions, or really any method or
Mhm.
any new
Mhm.
methodology, is to first educate people about why you're doing it. So I often now provide evaluation backgrounders. I talk about what's wrong with the old, what's the science say about the old type of question? Why are the new questions better? And then everybody's on the
Mhm.
same page and they're moving forward. So you don't get that resistance.
True. And your book, again, CEO's Guide to Training, E-Learning, and Work, uniquely that targets both the senior leadership and the elite LNB team. So how do you balance the strategic ROI kind of mindset of CEOs with the operation challenges, which is actually faced by the LNB professionals within a single framework? That's really tough. So how do you do
Yeah.
that?
First of all, what do CEOs want? They want their company to be successful.
True.
And,
Hmm.
and what do they want from L&D? They want their employees to know more stuff, to know the right
Yeah.
stuff. They want
Hmm.
the employees to be motivated to apply what they've learned. They want the employees to remember what they learned. They want them to be able to put it into practice. So we
Hmm.
should be focusing on those things, those leverage points to give our companies a competitive advantage. When CEOs hear about, I'm just going to give you one example. When CEOs hear about
Yeah.
the learning sciences and they hear about if an L&D team uses these science-based factors like retrieval practice and the
Hmm.
spacing effect and context alignment and feedback. These are
Hmm.
just four of them. These are the examples I use in the book. I have four
Hmm.
chapters. Is just to give people an example of what the learning sciences are. If you use
Hmm.
these four things, you're likely to get 100% improvement in remembering. That's double.
True.
So a
Hmm.
CEO looks at that and goes, "Hey, L&D team, do this. This is going to give
Hmm.
us a competitive advantage." So that's really the leverage point I think we have in focusing on competitive advantage, and that's just one of the examples of a competitive advantage.
It's more to do with how the strategic thinking kind of aligns to actual theoretical things. So theoretical part is at times taken care by the L&D where we get to learn a lot of things. But how do we actually imply or apply that into a real-time strategy is where the CEO mindset goes. And I have seen that in my org because we are into L&D space. So that's definitely exciting, and you get to learn something different from everyone all across the space. I had one more question for you. So the LTM, the learning transfer evaluation model, is almost synonymous with your work, right? So for listeners new to LTM, can you break down its key levels or steps, explain why it offers more robust evaluation of learning outcomes than the traditional, right? Like just the smile sheets you spoke of.
Sure. LTEM is a learning evaluation framework. It's a conceptual model. It was designed because we needed a replacement for the Kirkpatrick four-level model. You might hear me
Hmm.
calling it the Kirkpatrick-Kutzell four-level model because it
Hmm.
turns out Raymond Kutzell was really the originator of the four-level idea, and then Donald Kirkpatrick put labels on the levels and popularized it. So I
Yeah.
feel like both gentlemen deserve credit. The problem with most evaluation models is they don't have any learning wisdom baked into them. For
Yeah.
example, in the four-level model, level two learning, what's in that bucket? That
Mhm.
could be the regurgitation of trivia. It could be the
Yeah.
recall or recognition of meaningless information or
Mhm.
meaningful or
Mhm.
decision making or task performance or skills. Now that's a wide continuum from trivia to skills. But the problem with this model is we have that one bucket, level two learning. And so it doesn't help us in our minds differentiate. So when we say, hey, we need a level two evaluation. Oh, let's
Mhm.
do a knowledge check. That's a
Mhm.
fairly low level, some of the kind of learning outcomes we want. A knowledge check is not good enough. So LTEM is designed with some learning wisdom in mind.
Mhm.
So instead of for the learning focus, it divides learning into knowledge, decision making, and task
Mhm.
performance. I'll go through all the eight levels. Just so your viewers know, I don't know if you
Mhm.
can, but it's a one-page framework. There
Mhm.
are some helpful hints on the back. There's a
Mhm.
52-page report that goes along with it. Tier one is attendance or completion. This is when we're measuring, do learners come to the program? Do they
Yeah.
finish it, et cetera? And as I say in the model, there's a fine print here. The fine print says, this is not acceptable to validate our
Mhm.
learning results because people can complete a course, but they may not
Mhm.
have learned. They might have gotten demotivated to use what you're teaching them. May not remember what they learned. So that's not good enough. That's tier one. Tier two is learner activity. These are when learners engage in activities related to learning. Again,
Mhm.
this is not good enough to measure because people can engage in lots of learning, but they may not learn what we want them to learn. Tier 3 is learner perceptions. This is where we're doing our smile sheets, but we could also use focus groups and other things. Tier 4 is knowledge. And knowledge, in the new version of LTEM, there's a new version, by the way, that
Mm-hmm.
came out a few months ago.
Mm-hmm.
Knowledge is divided into two levels. So
Mm-hmm.
foundational knowledge is
Yeah.
critical for decision making, and
Mm-hmm.
trivial knowledge. And then tier 5 is decision making. Tier 6 is task performance. That's where we go really into deep in some of our learning outcomes. Tier 7 is transfer to work performance. And tier 8 is the effects of transfer. So that's where we might look at our KPIs, our
Mm-hmm.
impact on our customers, et
Yeah.
cetera. I know that verbally that's not a great way to display LTEM. I encourage people to go
Uh-huh.
to the LTEM website and actually
Yeah.
do it in person. But
And you still again spoke about the smile sheets. I had a question there. Why do you think that smile sheets still remain popular despite their shortcomings?
they're easy. That's the
Mm-hmm.
main reason. They're easy. We get feedback on them. And I am what I tell my clients, and I teach this workshop called the LTEM Boot Camp, go into this in great depth. What I tell people is, hey, a really good learner survey is a great entry point. If your
Mm-hmm.
learning team wants to begin to improve your learning evaluation work, it's great to dive in and build a new and better learner survey. You get some good results there. And then you can think about other things to do, like measuring people's decision making, their
Mm-hmm.
task performance, et cetera.
Makes sense. And again, learning science is fundamentally reshaping how we design effective learning experiences, especially as new technologies emerge. How do you see the integration of the cutting edge tech with learning science principles shaping the future of training and e-learning over, let's say, next 3 to 5 years?
First thing to do is we need to realize that technology by itself is not what creates learning. What
Hmm.
creates learning is the learning methods used. If the technology enables certain methods, then
Hmm.
that's a good thing. For example, we know that realistic practice, that's a learning
Yeah.
method, works. So the technology that enables people to make real decisions, to practice what they're doing, is a
Hmm.
good methodology. I think the best way for me to explain this is to dive into this a little bit. Let me use my LTEM bootcamp as an example.
Hmm.
It's a 6-week program, and it's got a live session every week, 2.5-hour session every week. We get online on Zoom and we have good conversations. I cover content, et cetera. People wrangle with questions. We have discussions and breakouts and things. And then in between those sessions, there's a lot of homework. So there's readings, there's decision-making
Hmm.
challenges, there's projects to do, there's discussions, reflections, et cetera. And then there's some additional work on the back end if you want to earn your gold certification. So how does technology play into this? Well, there is a platform that's needed. Some people call these learning experience platforms, but those are fairly simple technologies. Notice we're following some of the learning science principles. We're getting people to practice stuff. We're getting people to repeat stuff spaced over time, et cetera. So it's not the technology per se, but it's the enabling of those learning factors based on the learning sciences that it's making a difference. Now, technology does have its benefits. And there's an article that came out last year in the Wall Street Journal talking about virtual reality. And it
Hmm.
emphasized what we all know, that in the past, some virtual reality stuff just didn't work that well. But now it's we're beginning to figure out how to design it so it does work. Now think about what virtual reality, that's a technology. It's a great
Yeah.
technology sometimes if it's well designed. But what does it provide? It
Hmm.
provides a realistic context, hopefully,
Hmm.
and pushes our learners to make decisions and take actions within that virtual reality. And so it's those
True.
actions that make a difference. So I do see some opportunities with virtual technologies like virtual
Yeah.
reality, augmented reality. Generative AI is offering some potential,
True.
although
Hmm.
we'll probably mess it up before we do it right. Um, but
Yeah.
there are those opportunities, and also some individualized learning. I think that'll be beneficial as well.
Yeah, actually, that was my next question. In terms of technologies, you spoke about the virtual reality and Gen AI. So, could you also share some of the examples of an organization where you have actually seen that successfully navigated through any of those challenges and actually implemented those solutions?
Yeah, so let's focus in on one solution. We know that the spacing effect, which is spacing repetitions over time, can be very valuable, and not just boring rote repetitions, but interesting repetitions of the concepts or decisions, that can be very valuable. So there are these tools out there, there's a whole bunch of them that enable this reinforcement over time, space practice. And they can be very effective. But when I've heard this story over and over, if all the training courses have these spaced repetitions, then you can imagine a learner who's taking several training courses is being bombarded 3 times a week or something to do all this stuff. It can be overwhelming. It could be too much. So that's a practical situation where we have to balance what we
Mhm.
can do with what we should do.
True. And at the core of your work is the idea that L&D can serve as strategic competitive advantage. What does the transformation look like in practice, and how can organizations shift from the basic traditional compliance driven training that we currently do to the initiatives that actually drive the real business outcome?
Sure. There's several layers to that question. So one thing we have to connect with our
Hmm.
senior leadership in ways that resonate. So I'll give you an example. I was once working at this, I was called into this pharmaceutical company, and the L&D person there wanted me to help them aligning their training practices with the learning sciences. And so we got some plans ready to do that. But then she was deathly afraid that her
Hmm.
senior leadership would be
Hmm.
resistant, because what we were
Oh.
going to have to do is we're going to have to teach fewer concepts and give more practice. And so she asked me to make a presentation to some of the senior leadership there. And as I was doing this,
Mhm.
what really resonated, I was talking about the research, and
Yeah.
that seemed to, oh, yeah, okay, that's important. But then I showed them the
Hmm.
learning and forgetting curve. And I said,
Hmm.
hey, if your learners go up a learning curve, that's great. That's what we do in the training. But if
Yeah.
after that, there's no reinforcement or we don't design the training properly, then people are going to forget. And these
Yeah.
senior leaders just go, whoa, this is important. We really need this. Please give us this realistic practice. Do whatever you need to do. So that really, we need to be framing this in terms that
I love this.
will resonate. And now I think you asked about what some practical things we can do to create a competitive
Mm.
advantage. There's many. So the learning science is one. There's also the performance sciences. So these are things
Yeah.
like habit science, nudging, network
Hmm.
science, persuasion. These are so new that
Yeah.
if our L&D team is doing these and our
Hmm.
competitors are not doing them, then we have a competitive advantage. And just going
True.
back to the learning sciences, can you imagine one learning team is getting double the results of another? That's a competitive advantage. There's other things like one of the things we do in training is we teach in courses, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we have these ideas we want to get across. We put them in a course and we hope that's going to work. Well, we know from the learning
Hmm.
science that if you space learning repetitions over time, that's better. So
Yeah.
one thing we can do to create a competitive advantage is to figure out what some of the main ideas we want to get across in our organizations are. So maybe right now, our organization is focused on being more creative, being more innovative.
Mhm.
Instead of teaching a course on innovation, teach the course on innovation, but also have creativity exercises in a
Yeah.
number of courses. And that gives that spaced repetition. Or some of the values of your organization you want to reinforce. Well, don't just teach them in your onboarding classes,
Yeah.
integrate into decision scenarios throughout, or Gen
True.
AI. We're all trying to get good at Gen AI. So let's not
Yeah.
just teach prompt engineering in a particular course.
Yeah.
Let's have Gen AI integrated into many courses throughout. There's workflow learning, there's managers. I used to be a leadership trainer, and one of the things I never did was I never taught my manager trainees. I never taught them how to help their direct reports learn. But if managers are the glue in organizations, they really make things happen. If they can help their direct reports learn
Mhm.
better, that has a
Mhm.
ripple effect. So the team is better off. They're encouraging psychological safety, having a growth mindset. They're taking a little more risks. They're experimenting. They're being more innovative. They're more energized. They're more loyal to their company because they're learning. So that's another opportunity for competitive advantage. So there's just a whole long list, and that's what I focus on in this book, The CEO's Guide to Training, E-Learning, and Work.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's a book only for senior people, but it's also for us too. What I think is I wrote the book to let senior people know the work that we do in L&D and know how to
True.
partner with us and know how to resource us and know how to support us. But also for us, we need to empower ourselves. If we build these, if we can focus on competitive advantage, First of all, that's something that's going to align with the business. When we talk
Yeah.
about
Hmm.
competitive advantage, we're going to be taken seriously. But also, we can build these practices. Like learning evaluation is another way to get a competitive advantage. If you do
True.
good learning evaluation that's
Yeah.
aligned with the learning research and using a model like LTEM, then
Yeah.
we're going to be creating more effective courses. If we create more effective courses and our competitors don't, then our company has
Hmm.
a competitive advantage. So this has an iterative cyclical impact.
Yeah, that's true. And you spoke very beautifully about one of the things is continued learning, right? So people feel that we had these learning platforms, we learn something, and they feel that they need to move on. But the idea is that learning is never just monotonous, right? You evolve. There would be a new technology that would come down the line, and it's continuous. So if you're able to make that impact as a muscle memory into the people who are learning, provide them with a better experience every day by bringing something new, I think that's how it works. And integrating with any of those technologies at this point, that is what even what Fix does, right? Fix integrates well into these applications and ensure they're able to provide the real-time training. So that's the need of the hour because everyone wants to be there top in the game by learning something every day. So you nicely articulated that and I just love that thought of yours.
And let me piggyback on that. I think that is so important. We as learning professionals need to, number one, be learners ourselves.
True.
We have all these people flowing into our field every year,
Yeah.
the rookies, and we don't always train them up as well as we
Hmm.
might. And part of this is professional development. But part of this, I think, is for us to get better feedback. So if we do better learning evaluation, we can learn from that. But also, we ought to take some time out. You know how oftentimes they tell us to go to the doctor once a year to get
Hmm.
checked up, just a regular checkup, or we got to take our car in once a year to
Hmm.
get it checked up, or I just had a HVAC person come in to check our heating and cooling system yesterday. We needed a checkup. He found something terribly wrong. I had to pay thousands of dollars. But anyway, get checkups. What about us on our learning teams? I think it'd be really good to have periodic, like audit our own processes or bring in an outside person to give something like research benchmarking. How are we aligned with the research? How are we not aligned with the research? How are we aligned? Are we following these competitive advantage practices or are we not? Let's explore that. And by doing that, we learn and we improve. And our learning team not only is more energized, but they're more likely to stay with our organizations because it's fun. It's fun to learn.
That's true. And you just spoke about some of the research areas. What emerging research areas and methodologies do you think will redefine the L&D in the coming year? And which development excites you the most and why? So there are
Oh,
two parts of
sure.
the question.
Um, uh, I think there's 2 general strands here. Number
Mhm.
1, the learning and performance sciences, they're always evolving, but in
Mhm.
the last 10, 15, 20 years, we have learned so much about how
Yeah.
learning so we can make really good recommendations. So I would encourage anybody in the L&D field to keep up with that work, and, you don't have to read the research yourself, but go to the research to practice experts. This is part of what I do. There's folks like Ruth Clark, Julie Dirksen, Patty Shank, Clark Quinn, Miriam Nealon, Carl Kopp, Donald Clark does some of this. So that's one side, the learning and performance side. The other side is
Mhm.
better evaluation practices. When we do that, we cycle up.
Yeah.
We get better feedback. We can create virtuous cycles of continuous improvement. And so
Mhm.
those are the 2 main things. I would also keep an eye on AI and think about
Mhm.
what that can do for us. And don't just do it willy nilly, but try to really make it strategic and useful, and try not to fall into some of the pitfalls that we do
Yeah.
with any technology.
Yeah. I know you spoke a bit about it, but for L&D professionals looking to stay ahead, what actionable resources, communities, or practices you would recommend to help them prepare for and better adopt to these innovations?
Again, research to practice translators, if you will. These are the
Mhm.
folks that they're real L&D practitioners, but they spend a lot of
Mhm.
time looking at the science. And we go to the science because scientists tend to use more rigorous practices than the rest of us as we look and observe. And they fight amongst each other to make sure that the work is good and like that. So the research to practice practitioners, and there's organizations, trade organizations like the Learning and Development Accelerator (LDA)
Mhm. Mhm.
focuses a lot on that. ISPI, International Society of Performance Improvement. It's a small organization, but it focuses a lot on
Mm-hmm.
that. The Learning Guild does a lot of that work
Mm-hmm.
through the work of Jane Bozarth. So just pay attention to those folks. And by the way, I want to highlight something that may not be straightforward. So there's research and then there's research. So don't just go to research, but go to the scientific research. For example, one of the problems we have in our field is we do these industry surveys, and I've done
Yeah.
them too. And we ask
Mm-hmm.
everybody what they think. That's great. And we probably ought to know what people think so we can frame what we're doing. But we try to aim for what everybody else says they're doing. That does not give us a competitive advantage. That pushes
Mm-hmm.
us toward sort of the mediocre, the average response. So if you're interested in looking at the research, focus on scientific research or the translated scientific research.
It's all about thinking big and thinking different. And I'm glad you brought this up. It's all about where we are able to navigate through and get the right learning for all of the people and obviously our listeners. So you shared so much today, Will. Thank you so much for that. It has been an enlightening conversation for sure.
Thank you, Shreya. Thanks for inviting me. And thanks for all the good questions and the good conversation. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And your insights on merging research with practice in L&D definitely are both inspiring and practical. And we truly appreciate you sharing your journey with us. So that's indeed great. I think that's all we have for today. And to all our listeners, don't forget to subscribe to the Digital Adoption Show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share and leave a review. It will really help us bring more great content your way. I'm your host, Rajamaster, signing off for the day. Until next time, keep exploring the intersection of learning and technology.